Hello everybody, Carol Garrison with Carol's Creative Escape. Thank you so much for joining me this week for my Make It Monday video. I am very pleased that you were able to join me tonight, and I hope that you have some cool ideas of things you can do with this technique that I'm going to show you. It is the Faux Patina technique, and when I was asked to create a card using this technique, my first thought was I'm going to use the Textured Chic suite of products. And I wasn't quite sure how my card was going to turn out when I started it, but I really like the end results of my card. So let me just go ahead and I'm going to just jump right in tonight and show you how to make this card. There's a lot of steps to it, so let us go ahead and get going. First off, I'm going to show you this card. And again, it's the Faux Patina technique, which is kind of this aged metal sort of look that sometimes will get that bluish greenish tone to it, and it's done with a lot of heat embossing and some using an embossing folder and that type of thing. And I really think that this Textured Chic suite of products jumped into it. Then I'm also going to show you, I'll bring this up just a little bit closer, how you can make kind of the shadow effect behind your words as well. So again, like I said, there's a lot of steps to this card. I've actually already have a chunk of it done because I wanted to be able to focus on the technique and show you how to make the card and not have you spend a lot of time listening to the heat gun, which is basically what will be happening. So let's go ahead and get started first with our measurements for this card. I am using a piece of 5.5 by 8.5 soft succulent cardstock that I've scored at 4. I think I scored it. Yep, I scored it at 4 1/4. And you can see I've already used my limited edition stamp set to create my Stampin' Up! Copyright information. And then I have another piece of the soft succulent that measured 4 by 5 1/4. And I've already started doing some of the process on the front of that piece. And then I need a piece of 4 by 5 1/4 Whisper White or Basic White cardstock for the inside of my card. And then I also need a piece of Designer Series paper, and this measures 3 1/4. I want to make sure I'm giving that to you right. 3 1/4 by 4 5/8. And that is going to be cut so that it'll fit underneath this picture frame that we're eventually going to be creating here with the card today. And then I also have some, even though the color for this paper says that it's Blushing Bride, I prefer using says that it's the Petal Pink. I prefer using my Blushing Bride. To me, it's a better match. So I've got some colors that flowers that I've pre-stamped and die cut out that we're going to be using today. And then the other thing that I have is a piece of Basic White scrap for the sentiment. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and get started in showing you how to create the Faux Patina effect first. I have used a piece of the soft succulent cardstock, and the reason I chose that is sometimes after you've heat embossed and you run it through a die cut machine, some of the embossing powder will chip off. And I actually wanted that to happen because this color reminded me a lot of the color you can see when metal has kind of aged a little bit. And so I didn't care if some of that showed through in the card that I'm making. So far I've used silver embossing powder and gold embossing powder, and I'm going to add a little bit of copper. Again, I didn't want to be spending a lot of time making noise for you to listen to as I was working through on this project today. And so what I'm going to do is just grab a piece of scratch paper. My desk is a great big mess right now. I've been working on a couple different projects and it is really messy. I think this is going to work just fine for me. And so what I'm going to do is I've got a blending brush and I'm using my Versamark on it. I will be using soap and water when I am done with this card to clean my brush off, I've picked up a little bit of the embossing powder and things like that on it. And because I'm using the Versamark, I also want to make sure that I'm getting it out of here as well. So basically what I've done is I've used a blending brush and I'm just randomly adding color. Right now I'm making sure that I cover up any of the places where I kind of have green showing through. And I'm going right over where I've already embossed. This is not a problem to do that. Powder will just stick over it. And you'll notice I've got some kind of flat places and some bubble places where I didn't let it melt as much. That was all done on purpose because it kind of gives that old school look a little bit, at least in my opinion. So I've spread my Versamark on here, and I am now going to take the third embossing color. I have found I kind of like it better when I have a little more silver on it. But you can play with this all you want. Each card, again, as is the case for the last few that I've shown you, is going to be a unique card. No cards will look the same. And I'm going to be dumping my embossing powder pretty much all over this card because I don't know for sure where I've rubbed Versamark and where I haven't. And then I'm just going to tap it off onto my paper here. You don't want to click it, you know, get rid of a lot of the excess stuff. And I'm actually happy when some of it sticks randomly in places on this cardstock, simply because that's the look I'm going for. Normally we want to get rid of all that. And today I have no problems having it there because it only enhances what I'm trying to show you. Hopefully that makes sense. So the next thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and use my heating tool. And I'm just going to finish melting the copper on here. I've got it off camera, but I'll move it back here so that you can at least see what it looks like when it starts melting if you haven't done a lot of heat embossing. It starts to get kind of shiny instead of that dull powdery look. And the reason I like to use Versamark is it stays wet, so to speak, for a long period of time, and that allows you to kind of keep working on different, you know, making sure that you can get the powder on there. You don't have to rush through like you do if you're just using regular ink or something like that. The Versamark is going to stay wet for a longer period of time, so that when you go to do your heat embossing like this, it gets nice and shiny. And I think of the three colors, the copper tends to go the smoothest, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure why. And when you're making this card, I'm going to encourage you to have this be the first step that you do, is creating this piece. And the reason for that is that it needs to dry, and I'm adding one more step to create a little bit more of the old look. And I want to make sure that that ink also has a good chance of drying before you start doing things. So now we have this piece of cardstock, and it's got copper, silver, and gold. And of course, this is still soft to the touch, so we do want it to dry a little bit. So the next piece, well, that's, or cooling, I should say, because it's still sticky, and I'm going to be running it through an embossing folder. And so I want to make sure that it's cooled, otherwise it's going to stick to my embossing folder. So while you're doing that, the next thing that I'm going to recommend is that you stamp the inside of this card. Now, like I mentioned, I'm using the Textured Chic suite of products to create this card, and as luck would have it, I had multiple projects going on here. So it's the Season of Chic stamp set that I'm using, along with the coordinating dies. And remember, this is the one I just did a bundle class with this. It was a lot of fun creating some unique projects using this set. But I've got fall, summer, spring, and winter covered in this set. And there's some real nice greetings with this as well, along with the dies that'll cut out almost everything on here too. So that is the stamp set that I'm using, and I just grabbed the Wishing You the Best Birthday Ever, which I stamped in soft suede. And then I used just this speckled stamp. I stamped it in Blushing Bride, stamped it off on some paper, so I've got second generation stamping here. And that just gives me a little bit to pop out the sentiment. Okay, this has cooled, so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to grab my cut and emboss machine here, and I am using the 3D embossing folder. This is the Stripes and Bubbles 3D embossing folder in the annual catalog, and I like this folder for this particular card because it's adding the texture that I want, and I'm going to be able to slide over so that I can emboss this whole folder and or the whole sheet of paper rather, and nobody's really going to know that it was two separate passes in the machine here that made it happen. It's a pretty forgiving folder for this technique. Okay, let me just slide it over. And what I've done is kind of slide it over so I have my last embossing thing kind of right on the edge. I don't want to stress the paper too much by going over it again. I have seen where some people have used the spritzer to dampen the back of the cardstock before they run it through the embossing folder. I did it the first time I tried this technique and it was fine. I forgot it the second time I tried the technique and it was fine. I was going to show you how to do it and I forgot again. So I'm not sure that that's a necessary step. Okay. Sorry for the jiggling that occurred with that too, but it is part of the process here. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is grab another piece of scratch paper. Now, I had a really good tablet that I was using, and I don't know what happened to it. So I'm going to grab another piece off of here, and this is the part that gets a little bit messy. I've got a sponge that's got Memento Black ink on it. And what I am doing is just getting it inked up and rubbing it right over to add texture. You don't want to press super hard because I found out I was actually kind of rubbing off what I was putting back on. But what I'm hoping is that some of the rough spots will pick up some of the ink. And I do have a little tip to help you get this ink to dry faster. It tends to stick more where I've left the embossing stuff a little bit rough because obviously there's some dimension there that it'll add into. But to me, this gave it just a little bit more of the aged impact look, whatever. So I'm going to do this, and like I said, this is where your fingers start to get a little bit dirty. And so what I am now going to do, see, is close this up and move that out of the way. And then all I did to help speed up the drying on here is I again got my heat gun out and I just am running it over the card again, and that helped dry up a chunk of the ink, and it may melt in a little bit, maybe where I've got embossing powder too, who knows, wouldn't surprise me. Okay, that's done. No more noise, I promise. And then I just had a piece of paper towel that I was using once I got done with this stage. I've used this one a couple times. I'll fold it over and get some fresh clean stuff. And then I just kind of wiped over to get rid of anything that hadn't dried. So it's not a lot, but it just adds a little bit of pop to the card. I found that just using a wipe on my fingertips was enough to get that black off of it, so that I shouldn't say black off, but it got the wet ink off my fingers, and prevented me from getting it onto other parts of my card. Okay, so we're going to pull that out. And then the next thing that I did was use I think I showed these to you a couple weeks ago. These are the deckled rectangle dies. And I picked these because, again, I'm trying to do sort of a vintage card. And this reminded me a lot of that vintage look. So let me go grab my cutting plates. Sorry about that. I thought I had those over here with me. And so I'm going to pull up my machine one more time. And I'm going to go with my base plate and one of my well-used cutting plates. And then I am using 2 of these dies just to create a picture frame, basically. And so we will set these down. And the big thing is you want to make sure that you've got the 2 frames centered. I'm just making sure I'm on camera here for you. And sometimes I find that the dies get hung up on some of the bumps, so you just gotta work with it. It's kind of like the magnetic board where the stuff jumps a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to slide my other plate on top of that. And it shifted just a little bit, so I do have a piece of washi tape here that I think I'm going to grab. Oops. And set on here just to hold the 2 frames in place. Then I will set my plate on there. And again, I don't have the right plate combination. No, sorry, Bob, I do not. Which I thought I did, so I'm kind of surprised. 1, 2, 3. Thank goodness. Let me grab number 3. But you know what's strange? Just a second. Okay, I got it now. So I've got this plate, and then I put my sandwich up there. Sorry about that. I usually have this machine set up strictly for my embossing folders, and then I have a second machine set up that I use for cutting, and that way these rough plates don't leave an impression on my die cuts when I'm working on those. All right. I apologize for the camera bounces today. This should be the last of it. And so now what I've got is a frame that I can throw away. Don't need that. And I've got the frame that I've created. And then I have these inside pieces that I'm not really sure yet what I'm going to do with them. But here are the ones from my other projects. So each one is a little bit different. I think they'll make some kind of cool background pieces. But I like the variation that I get on the frame itself. I think that is exactly what I was looking for when I'm working on this. So now, and it's okay, sometimes it'll break through again because we've worked these fibers pretty hard. Don't worry about that, because once we get this adhered to our cardstock, that is not going to show. And so basically, I am just adding adhesive, and I'm doing my adhesive on a silicone mat because I do want to make sure I get plenty of adhesive around the edges. And this way, if it runs off, it's, oops. Okay, that one's going to be a bit more challenging to fix, but we can do it. We'll set it aside. So will that one. Even though you guys are watching this as a pre-recorded video, I am actually doing it as a live video. So that creates a few challenges as we go working through. So then I've got my piece of designer series paper, and because of the breaks that are occurring on this one, this is the first time I've had issues with breakage like this. This paper is designed to fit just underneath the frame. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully start putting it on so that I know none of the frame shows, or none of the paper shows around the frame, around the outside of it. So fortunately, this is a very forgiving task that we're working on, and I have a feeling that this piece went right here. And so you see I can pretty much pop it right back into place and it isn't going to show. And then this piece went here, and here's where we may have to do just a little bit of getting stuff to spread a little bit so that the pieces fit inside. But except for those of you watching the video, I don't think anybody will ever know that there were tears on that frame. So please don't panic and think you need to start this process all over, because you don't. And then I'm just going to press it down pretty good on the back side of it so that I know it's adhered well. All right, so that creates the frame for my card. And from here, the rest is fairly easy. The next thing I want to do is show you how to do the sentiment. Now, I am using my Stamparatus, and I've already lined up my stamp where I want it up here. And all I'm going to do is take this piece of white cardstock, and it measures 3/4 of an inch wide. That's really all you need to know about. And what I'm doing is putting this almost all the way, but not completely up into the corner. So it's just a fraction away from that. And I put a little bit of adhesive just to hold it in place for us as we're going through. And then I'm going to grab my soft saddle, or soft suede ink pad, and I'm going to ink up the sentiment. And simply come over here and make sure I get a good image. Okay. And then it always wants to pop off a little bit. Now I'm going to take this same piece of paper and try to grab it. Okay. There we go. And I'm going to shove this sentiment clear up into the corner, so it's snug fit. And then without re-inking this, I'm just going to come back through and stamp the sentiment again. So it's going to give me a light shadow that matches up with my sentiment. So hopefully you can kind of see just a real faint duplicate of my sentiment. And so that is all I did with the Stamparatus. And the reason I chose my Stamparatus is I knew I could get perfect alignment by setting it up that way. And then I'm just going to come through and do a cut. I kind of liked having it a little longer through this process so that I could grab it. And now I'm just going to snip off that edge, and that gives us our sentiment. Phew! Okay, that completes the prep work for this card. So now what we're going to do, and the rest of this goes fairly quickly, we are going to fold this in half, and I'm going to use my bone folder to burnish that edge real well. And then I've got this piece that I've already stamped our sentiment on, and I'm going to run my adhesive, and if you remember, I always say light touch, quick check mark. That avoids it kind of getting gummy. And I'm going to center this on the inside of the card. And again, I oftentimes will flip my cards over so that I can make sure this adheres really well. And again, just real quick reminder, the stamp set that I'm using to get the Stampin' Up! Logo on the back of my cards is the limited edition stamp set. Anytime you sell your cards, you need to make sure that you have copyright Stampin' Up! On it somewhere. So this set that's in the annual catalog, it's called limited edition. It's got a bunch of different sentiments. I actually stamped this one and that one to create my copyright piece here today. Some of them it's one stamp, so just beware, you might have to add it depending on what you choose to use. This is item 158754 from the annual catalog, but by using one of these stamps with the copyright Stampin' Up, you're going to meet the angel policy if you are one that likes to sell your cards. All right, the next piece that we're going to do with this card is add our seal to the back of the designer series paper. And then this card I am offsetting in the corner here, and the reason for that is I want as much as possible of this frame to show once I put my sentiment on. You can center it if that makes you more comfortable. And I had one where the washi tape I was using tore the card just a little bit, so I want to make sure that I bury this flower. Again, absolutely still usable for this project. You just need to place it correctly. You know, location, location, location is kind of the guideline of the day for that. And then I need to take some dimensionals, and I am actually going to pop this one up using 3 dimensionals, and then I am going to do the same on our sentiment piece because I want those two at the same height. And so then you can just figure out the placement of your flowers. If you want it to overlap off your frame a little bit, perfectly fine to do that. My big thing is I just want to make sure as much of that little tear that I have comes off or is covered. And then this last one with the dimensionals, I will put right here, and that way I know that I've covered up the big tear anyhow on that. And then I will come back through and peel dimensionals off the back of my sentiment, and I want this sentiment to be lined up right on the edge of my card with it just slightly underneath that flower. And so we'll go ahead and press down so that the dimensionals adhere. And there is your finished card. Now, as I'm looking at this card, I felt it was missing something, and so I grabbed out my fine sparkle adhesive back gems. As you can tell, I haven't really used these, and there is a pink tone one, but I think it's the wrong color of pink, so I'm sticking with this tone, which to me is more of the soft succulent color that we're using in the card. And so those are the ones that are the embellishments that I'm using on this card, and so I liked it with just one of the large ones down here, and then, come on, a small one to either side of it. And there you go, you have your finished card. So you make each season of life even more beautiful, wishing you the best birthday ever. So you've got a real pretty birthday card, very different look, but I really thought the patina look is kind of vintage, and this paper strikes me as being a very vintage paper. So that's why I chose this combination. And again, I'm going to show you the 3 different cards that I've made using this technique, and you will see how each of them looks a little bit different. And part of that is just how the designer series paper came out. You know, my flowers are placed fairly evenly. This one I've got part of the frame showing. But you can, each card you create is going to give itself its own unique look, in part because you don't know how the colors are going to turn out on the frame, and in part because of how the designer series paper changes. So here's your faux patina technique. I hope you enjoyed learning this and that you give it a shot. It really is a lot of fun. It can take a little bit of time because of all the embossing that's required, but to me the end result is well worth what you get. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch me tonight. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.